All right. Daf Yomi sponsors for the month. We have to keep track of when the months start because we've got different sponsors from different time periods. However, the Daf Yomi sponsor for this month is Duvi and Tehila Catcher. B'zchus Refuah Shlema for Ephraim ben Shifra. And a new Daf Yomi sponsor of the month as of yesterday is from the Durbach, Abudi, and Mandel families in honor of the engagement of Shol Harris to Mira Mandel. May they build a bayis Nemon Yisrael, filled with Torah, Simcha, and Bracha.
Amen.
And
Coffee
for the base measure, sponsored by Rabbi Nota and Dr. Malin Glogauer in honor of all the incredible Torah learning happening in Kahal Yereim. Thank you for that. The coffee is excellent. So we will continue from Mishnah on Mem Vav Amud Aleph, midway down of the wide lines, about 2/3 of the way down. Otherwise, says the Mishnah, Ketzad Tolin Oso. How is the hanging to take place? So we knew that after the person was killed. So then we said in the last Mishnah we had discussed that some of the people who were put to death were hung, either all of those who received skila or just those that received skila for the punishments of avodah zarah. And what was the other one? Avodah zarah and Mikal Megadeh for the blasphemer for Hashem. That's correct. So how did the hanging take place? So then. Mashkina Sakora Ba'aretz, they would place the beam, a beam of wood, into the ground. Va'etz Yosef Yotze, and then this is what we need this for.
You mean like a gallows?
Like a gallows.
That's what it sounds like.
That's what it looks like. I'm picturing almost like a basketball hoop, right? So they would stick this end into the ground, right? And then they would have a piece of wood that would go out from the top of it like this. And I guess they would have some kind of hook like that over there. Okay?
Hangman.
So yes, like hangman. So mashkin es korbarts va'etz yotze, the wood would stick out. So then umakif shtei yadav zu agav zu, and then they would tie his hands together, one on top of the other. V'tola oso, and they would hang his hands up over the hook, and that was how that was done. Rabbi Yossi says, Hakora muta al kosel, that what was supposed to happen is that you would have a wall like this, and then you would take the piece of wood and just lean it against the wall like so, and then have your hook from it over here, and they would hang the person that way from it over that way, right? So that's how I'm understanding what's going on here. So they had a wall, they leaned the piece of wood against the wall, and then they would hang him that way.
Well, these two different ways.
Two different ways of doing it. Correct. That's the argument we're going to see. Subject to understanding the psukim, why they each hold that way.
Okay.
So they would tolo, so they would hang him kederach shehatavchin osin, just like the butchers. So they hang their meat that way. So umatirno so miyad, and then they would untie him and take him down immediately. So just hang him up like that for a second, and then take him down immediately. V'im lon, and if he stays overnight that way, over alav below sase, you have violated a negative commandment because the pasuk says shenemar lo salin nevela so al ha'etz ki kavor tikberenu. You should not leave his body, his corpse, on the tree. Rather, you should surely bury it. Ki killas elokim talui, because the killas Hashem, which we would interpret the klala, the curse of Hashem, is hanging. Right. The fact is that it's important for people to recognize. Oh, that's what happens when you blaspheme Hashem. Fine, but to leave him up there, we're going to see what the issue is. But people are going to take a look and say, that's a human being who cursed Hashem, and people will remember the Aveira, or that people will see the person resembles the Shechina, and so these are things that you don't want to leave up there. Klomar, mipnei ma zet talui. So people are going to say, because why? What would people are going to say? Why is this person hanging there? Mipnei shebirachas Hashem. So then people are going to say, because he cursed Hashem. V'nimtza shem shemayim mischalel. And as a result of everybody talking about the Aveira that took place, that ultimately will lead to the desecration of God's name. So you want him hung for a second, but not for too long, because you don't want that to be the talk. Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, B'shash adam mitztayer, when a person is upset, shchina ma lashon omeres. So what is the language that the Shechina uses? Koloni miroshi, koloni mizaroi. Hashem says, my head is in pain, my arms are in pain. right? That is an excellent point. These are what we call those anthropomorphisms. That's the word, right? It is a method of that the Tanakh often uses to describe Hashem in humanistic terms to be able to help us understand what it is that Hashem's feeling. In this case, we're seeing that when a person is in suffering, Hashem he is also in suffering, and that's what's going on here. Im kain hamako mitzdar al damon shel rishayim shenishbach. That means that if Hashem is all concerned and upset for somebody who's a wicked person, right, that he gets killed, kal v'chomer al daman shel tzadikim, we can learn how much more so Hashem is worried and upset about a righteous person. V'lo zu bilvad amru. Not only that did they say, ela kol ha-malin es meso, anybody who leaves any dead body, they don't get buried the same day that they die, so over below say they have violated a negative commandment, right? So
it's not respectful to the body if you don't bury it right.
That's what we're learning, but it's not just disrespectful, it's a pasuk. Pasuk tells you, halinu lichvodo, lahavilo arn, halinu lich, that's because that's the pasuk says, he's also violating this lo say, right? Ki kavor tik berenu, that you should surely bury the person. And so that is a prohibition in the Torah, not just, it's kavod. We're going to ask the question, kavod for who? But let's say it is a kavod thing, but it's more than a kavod thing. It's actually a lo say if you let a person not be buried overnight. Now, halinu lichvodo, if, however, the reason why you don't bury the person for that day is for their own honor, lahavi lo aron, for example, you got to get the funeral preparations done. You got to bring a casket, or v'tachrichim, or the clothing that the mace wears. Eno over love, that's not a violation of the lo say. You only, if you have to wait, so we have this in common cases now, you're waiting for a relative to fly in, right, in order to join the funeral or something like that, then you can leave the body overnight. Otherwise, generally speaking, we don't. Now, when this person is back to the case of the person who was killed Mises Basin, we don't bury him in his father's ancestral plots. We don't bury him in a regular cemetery. There were two graveyards that were set aside for Basin. One of the graveyards, one of the cemeteries, was for those that received the hereg death penalty, the sword penalty, and one for the strangulation penalty. The second cemetery was l'niskolin v'l'nisrafim, and for those that had gotten the more severe punishments of skila or sreifa, of burning or stoning. Now,
why do you need two? You just put them both in one.
So you can't. So the answer is because these are the types of averos that are that one gets these different punishments for are significant enough that the qualities that can make you, being a Rasha is relative, right? Somebody who's a Rasha so much that they got skila is a Rasha compared to somebody who is a regular murderer who got Saif, right? So somebody who violated Shabbos, that's a whole different category. Somebody who murders, that's a wicked person, can't be buried in the regular cemetery, but he's not wicked enough to get buried in the other cemetery. So we had cemeteries for these people, and then all of them were buried separately from the main cemetery.
Israel or Babylon, where was this?
Either one. Well, these are going to be, this could be in either place. Right?
I would imagine there'd be a small cemetery for...
I would imagine it's going to be a small cemetery. We're going to see. You don't even leave them here. It's going to say, this akil basar, once you let the bones rot for the body decompose for a little bit, melaktin es hatzamos, then you exhume the body.
That takes a couple of years before they...
I don't know how long it takes. A good question, right? The Gemara doesn't specify, but it's a little bit. It's not several years, but it's more than a few weeks, right? So the once the body decomposes a bit, so then you can exhume the body, the kovernoso bimkoman, and bury him in the regular burial plot with his ancestors.
With the mask, because it might smell.
So yes, you would do that, right? V'hakrovim boim visho. Now, so therefore, it must be a very small cemetery because essentially
it's a temporary,
yeah.
Correct. It's a very temporary sort of situation, and since these death penalty situations happened once, as we're going to say, once every 70 years or something like that,
right,
and they didn't stay there for very long, you only really needed 2-3 graves, maybe, right? You didn't really need a big location. V'akrovim boyim. Now the relatives come b'shalom hadayanin or b'shalom ha'edim. We discussed this yesterday. That's sort of the reason we think of executioners. The executioners stay anonymous, right? Because the people whose loved ones got killed might be upset at the executioner. So what we do is we tell the people who are the relatives of the deceased, you've got to make sure that you inquire about how well the judges are doing and make peace with the witnesses. You've got to say hello to them and check on them, because we don't want that negativity. We make it very clear to the relatives of the deceased.
Because that negativity forces the relative to want to kill you. That's
right. So this protects the judges and the witnesses for any retribution, right? We make sure. Klomar, she'ein belibenu aleichem. You have to make them say, we don't harbor any ill will towards you. Shedin emes dantem, because after all, you were just judging the truthful law. That was your job. You had no animosity. You judged it right. V'lo hayu misavlin. They didn't do any avelus for the person who died. There was no avelus. We'll discuss why. Aval oninin, but they did have the responsibility of aninus. Aninus is that first period of mourning before the body is buried, right? So then when you don't put on tefillin and you don't have certain mitzvahs and things
that you don't do mitzvahs before you bury the body. Basically. That's
correct. That's the aninus that we do. She'ein aninus el belev, because aninus is a matter of emotion, right? That's part of your emotion, and so therefore losing a relative that you don't have any say over. But doing the mitzvahs related to avelus, that we don't mourn the death of this person. Okay, now says the Gemara, Tanar Rabbanan, ilu nemar. If the pasuk had said chet v'talisa, now there's a few words missing in the pasuk. The Torah says v'chiyeh be'ish chet, if a person has an avera, mishpat maves, which he has to get a death sentence for, v'talisa osolates, then we're going to hang him on the tree. So if the pasuk said chet v'talisa, he sins, and then you hang him, hayisiomer tolin oso, I would think that what you've got to do is you hang him first, and then v'yachar kach mimisin oso, then you go and give him the death penalty. Right? And we said that the hanging is, tying his hands together and hanging him up. So you hang him up first, then you go give him the death sentence.
Hang him up and give him death penalty at the same time?
Sorry?
Couldn't you do both, hang him in and give him the death sentence?
No, because he's got to get thrown off a cliff. You can't do that if he's hanging, right? So then I would have said that we're going to hang him and then we're going to kill him. Like the way that the non-Jewish kings do. I guess that their method of execution was the hanging. So therefore, maybe I would have thought that was the case. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, not so. V'hu mas, first kill him. V'talisa, then you hang him. Mamisin oso v'yachar kach to'on oso. Ha ketzad, how do you do that? Mishayin oso ad samach l'shkias achama. So what we do is, when the case comes, so we wait right before sunset, right? Ve'gomrin es dino, and then we finalize the case. Memisin oso, and then we take him to be executed. V'yachar kach tolin oso, and then we're going to hang him for a second, right? Echad kosher v'echad matir, and it's got to be instantaneous. And we waited till nightfall because we have to be up against we have to say that we hung him that day, but we took him down immediately, and we want to be able to be forced to take him down because we can't leave him up at night. So therefore, you have him up there so quick that one guy ties him up there, and the other guy's untying him while the first guy's still tying. In other words, it's literally up and down. Just so that you are Mekayim the mitzvah. That's the whole thing. Tanar Rabbanan. So our rabbis learned eitz. So it says that he's supposed to be hung on an eitz, on a tree. Shomea ni bein betolish bein b'mechubar. That sounds like it could be a tree. Could be a tree that's still in the ground. Could be a tree that is separated from the ground, a beam of wood.
Or it could be a bin that we put in the ground.
A beam of wood, right? So Talmud Lomar, ki kavor, misha eino mechusar el kavura. So then it says that you would have to do it, you have to bury the person, which implies, and this, we're going to learn from this v'kavor that we're going to bury, right? You hang him and you bury, that we're also going to bury the wood that he's hung on simultaneously. So therefore, the burial is the person who died plus the wood. So this implies that the wood that you are burying, right, must be ready for burial. All that needs to be done is buried, not cut down. So a tree that was in the ground still, you'd have to cut it down and then you'd have to bury it. That would be a two-step process. Since the Torah says that the tree is going to be buried, that means that it's a piece of wood that all you got to do is bury it. Okay, so now Rabbi Yossi says, Misha inu mechusar ele kvura. So Rabbi Yossi says, you're right, that's what I'm learning. The tree has to be missing nothing other than simply putting it in the ground. Yotzeseshem mechusar tlisha kvura, which is why this, he says, is no good. Because this has the wood stuck into the ground. And so you'd have to unstick it from the ground and then bury it. My way, says Rabbi Yossi, is it's a piece of wood that's not stuck into the ground. It's leaning against the wall. Therefore, this is really what the pasuk means. Simply take the wood and bury it. So Rabbanan said Tlisha lav klum. So Rabbanan says just pulling a piece of wood out of the ground, that's nothing. That's not the same thing as uprooting a tree stump or cutting a tree down. That's not really anything significant. But that's the reason for their dispute about whether the tree could be stuck, whether the piece of wood could be stuck in the ground or not. Now we have klomar mipnei mazet tolui mipnei shabirach. So the pasuk says, so the Mishnah says that why is this person hanging? Why do we take him down so fast? Because we don't want people are going to come and take a look and they're going to talk about it, and we don't want that. Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Omer Rabbi Meir. Meir says, "Mashalo mashal lemadavar doma." I'll tell you what is a parable to what this is similar to. L'shnei achem te'umim be'ir achas. Imagine there are two twins, right, in one city. Echad minuhu melech. One of them gets appointed to become the king. Okay, so the story was you've got two twins in one city. One becomes the king. One is going out to be a robber. Tziva hamelech v'tlu utla'uhu. So the king commanded that his brother be captured, and they were hanging him. Kol haroa, so anybody who sees the twin brother hanging, Omer hamelech totally would say, the king is hanging. So Tziva hamelech v'horidu, so the king commands and takes him down. And that's the bottom line, is that the person is a representation of Hashem, and so therefore having him hang there is disrespectful to Hashem. That's why we take him down. Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, so my mashma. So Rabbi Meir said, when a person is in pain, Hashem is also in pain. So where do you see that from this pasuk? Like, where does Rabbi Meir all of a sudden come up with this idea that Hashem is in pain with people who are in pain? Where did he get that from? So Amar Rabbi says, Keman Damar kal leis. Right, it's because a person says that he says is killas Hashem, that it's the klala. We said that was literally means the curse, but it also means killas Hashem. It is kal leis, not light. This situation is not light to Hashem. Amarle Rava says im kain kaveda le roshi kaveda le zroi mi baile. So then he should have said what Remeir should have said then is my head is heavy on me. Right, that's what he should have said. El Amar Rava Keman Damar. Kil li alma, where like somebody who says, the world is light to me. So therefore that's what the person is saying, the world is light to me. So that's what Rabbi Meir's version is. What was it that Rabbi Meir exactly said? Rabbi Meir said, Kaloni meroshi, right? I'm light in the head, I'm light in the arm, right? As he's basically saying, the world is very light to me. That's what he's saying. Meaning, I guess nothing matters. So Haimi Baile Lagufa. So he says, but wait a second. How can you make a drasha from the word kilas Hashem, when the word kilas Hashem is telling us literally the person who cursed Hashem is up there? So im kain name akrof. That's the pasuk was only meaning to tell me that mikalel. Then we could have used the word the one who cursed Hashem mikalel. My kilalas. Why is the word kilalas used? So the answer is to tell me kilalas is to tell me this kales or according to Rava, was kill li, right? That's what he was saying. Ve'ema kule lahaki, kill li, meaning the world is light to me. So ve'ema kule lahaki, who da'asa, maybe that's the whole reason, and the mikalel part is not necessary. Im kain nimakra, kalas, my kilalas. So I wouldn't need the double lamed. Kilas would have been enough to be able to bring this drasha. So therefore, why kilash shmami notarti? It means both things, right? The one who has cursed Hashem is hanging, and it is also a negative thing to Hashem that the person is hanging. Velozu bilvad. Then we continue on. Not only is that the case, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum ben Yochai minayin limolen es meso she'over alav belosase. What is the source? So the Mishnah said this is not only true of this dead body, but all dead bodies. If you leave them over, you have to do a funeral right away. Can't leave a body overnight. And we say, okay, great. What's the source? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Ki kavor sik berenu, you shall surely bury. Mikan lemolinis misosha over belosa say. That is the source that if a person leaves his dead body over to the next day, that he's violated a prohibition. Ikadamri, there are those who say Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Remez lekvura min Torah minayin. What is a hint for where burial is required in the Torah? In other words, who says that a person needs to be buried? Maybe cremation, maybe other methods of disposing of a body. Why that? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Ki kavor tik berenu. Right? That is, you should surely bury. Mikan remez likvura min Torah. That is the hint in the Torah for where you're supposed to have a burial. Amar le Shibur Malka le Rav Chama. So one time there was a circumstance of Shibur Malka, who was a non-Jewish king, right? But he was well versed and liked to engage the Talmudic scholars in their discussions. So he asked, where's the source? He says, Kvura min Torah minayin. Where's the source for burial in the Torah? Ishtuk velo amar le velo midi. Nobody had the answer. Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Rav Acha bar Yaakov said, Im sar alma biyada de tipshoy. The world is in the hands of idiots. You ever feel that way? Right? Ever nobody figured out knows the answers? De iboy le memar ki kavor. So the pasuk says ki kavor, right? You should bury, right? So what was so difficult about that? So the answer is dilav le'aron. That doesn't prove anything. It just means that you have to make a coffin for the person. Tik berenu. The pasuk says surely bury him. Velo mashmalei. So he says that Shibur Malka wouldn't have listened. Now, as a drasha for Jewish people, we know that's when there's a double language. It means that you should surely do something, right? But Shibur Malka would have said that that's just human speech. That's the way people talk. So it wouldn't have meant anything to him. So they were trying to think of a good proof that they could have used to explain to Shibur Malka. They couldn't. Okay. Venema, why didn't they say to him, Mide ikbor tzadiki, that you've got many righteous people in the Torah who are buried, right? Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they all get buried. So why didn't they say, from the fact you see all these righteous people are getting buried in the Torah?
Whose head was that rolled into his burial place?
Sorry? Whose head rolled? That was Esav. Right? So that's a medrash. So minhaga bi'alma, that's not necessarily meaning that the halacha is you must. That just tells me that it was a custom that people were being buried back then. Mida kavrei HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe. What about the fact that Hashem buries Moshe Rabbeinu? So delo lishtani minhaga. The answer is Hashem just didn't want to change the custom. So, Hashem is just doing what everybody else was doing, right? Toshma, come and listen. V'safdu lo kol Yisrael v'kavru oso. So the Jewish people, they mourned him. This is talking about Avia, the son of Yeravam, right? So Avia, Yeravam, and his family were all very negative people, right? Yeravam and Nevat. They lived. They had the Rechavam and Yeravam the kingdom after Shlomo HaMelech split into two, and Yeravam was very evil, and but the son Avia was the one relative who was considered to be good, and he was buried with a positive funeral. V'safdu lo kol Yisrael v'kavru also. So they buried him. So you see, he was buried. Delo lishtani minhaga. So they say that no, that was just a custom. Again, doesn't prove anything. Just because the person happened to be buried doesn't mean that it was required. So lo yispadu v'lo yikavru. So ledumon al pnei ha'adama yiyu. This is about the rest of the family of Yeravam. They were promised that they would have no eulogies, they would not be buried, they'd be flung like dung on the face of the earth. So the answer is, again, so that implies that everybody else had to be buried. So the answer is no, dilishtanu minhaga, just to show you that they're not going to be treated like everybody else. They'll be treated in a negative, their bodies going to be treated in a negative way. Iboy lahu. So now the question is like this. Kvura mishum bizyonahu o mishum kaparahu. So what is the reason why we bury somebody? Are we burying somebody because it will prevent from embarrassment to the body, right? That the decomposition will not be visible, or is the burial some kind of atonement for the person, right? By being buried and returned to the ground, you show that your body is lowly and part of the ground, and it acquires some kind of atonement. So l'may nafkamin, who cares? What difference does that make? Which is the reason? So da'amar lo ba'inan delik varuha lahu gavra. Let's say somebody says, I don't want to be buried. If somebody says, I don't want to be buried, do we say, well, he's the one who doesn't want to be, it's for his embarrassment, he doesn't care, so then we don't have to worry about it? Or what about if somebody, but if it's for atonement, so let him get an atonement. We don't care. He doesn't know what's best for him. We're going to give him an atonement. So Or no, I've got it backwards, right? If it's so e amart mishum bizyonahu, I got it backwards, right? If it's because he's going to be embarrassed, lo kol kamine, right? He doesn't have the right to be able to just not worry about the embarrassment, because it's an embarrassment to his relatives, meaning his relatives are going to have this body decomposing there, and they're not going to want that. V'amart mishum kaparahu. So, but if it's as far as an atonement, so that's between him and Hashem. So then. Ha lo ba'in kapara. So he's saying, I don't want a kapara. So he has the right to say, I don't want a kapara. So what's the halacha? Right? Can you do that? So Toshmach, so come and listen. Mi de ikvor tzadiki, right? You could see the righteous people were all buried. So now, via mart mishum kapara, if that burial is because you're supposed to get an atonement, so tzadiki le kapara tzrichi, why are you burying righteous people? Righteous people don't need a kapara. So therefore you don't, clearly you see that burial has nothing to do with kapara. So the answer is no, that's not true. Even righteous people need an atonement. The pasuk says, Adam ein tzadik bar, there's no human being who is a perfect person in the land, asher yasa tov v'lo yechta, who is only good and doesn't do any averos. Everybody's got something to atone for, so therefore everybody's going to. Toshma, come listen, v'safdulo kol Yisrael. This is talking about Avia again. They made a eulogy for him, all of the Jewish people, the kavru, so when they buried him. V'amart ki hechi titzihavi le kapara. So if you're going to say that they're trying to give him a kapara, sonech nami likberu, so then you should also have buried all the rest of the relatives. Why only bury him? All the bad guys, for sure. If they buried him, then for sure bury all the bad guys. They need a kapara even more. Ki hechi titzihavi lu kapara, so that they can get a kapara. Hai tzadiku tihavi le kapara, hanach delo lihavi lehu kapara. The answer is no, because the one who was righteous enough, he deserved to get an atonement. So he got buried to get his deserved atonement. Those that were wicked, we didn't care enough about them to be able to give them an atonement. So they did not get an atonement, despite the fact they had more to atone for. Tashma, come listen. Lo yispedu v'lo yikveru delo tihavi lekapara. Right? That says that they should not be eulogized, they should not be buried, so that they will not have a kapara. That was their punishment. Iboilu. So they asked the fine question. Hespeda. So what about the hesped? What about the eulogy? Is it yikara dechaye havi? Is that to honor the living people that are at the funeral? Or yikara deshchvivi havu? Or is that for the kavod of the mace? Right? So lamay nafkamina, who cares? So the answer is Amar lo tispedua lahu gavra. Let's say somebody requests that they don't want a eulogy. They say, please don't give me a eulogy. Can a person make that request? So right? So if it's for the living heirs, he doesn't have the right to do that.
Is he giving a eulogy like respect for the body?
So that's the question: is it for the body or for the living people? Right? If it helps the mourners, so then he doesn't have a right to do that. Ina mila fuke miyorshin, or also. Another distinction is if you have to force the heirs to pay for it, right? Sometimes you have to hire somebody to be a professional eulogizer. So they used to have that job. So should they be forced to pay? If it's for themselves, the living people, so they should be able to say we don't want to pay. If it's for the mace, they have no choice. Right, you've got to take the Yerusha that they're getting and pay for the eulogy first. So Toshma, listen, come and listen. Vayavo Avram lispon l'sar v'liv kosar. Avram came and he gave a eulogy for Sarah and he cried. V'iyamart mishum yikar dechaye, if it's a matter of for the honor of the living, who so mishum yikar de Avraham mishahu l'sara. So why is it that if that because of the honor of Avraham, we're going to have Sarah Imenu not get buried, right? So she wasn't buried because Avram still had to give a eulogy. So if Avram had to give a eulogy for the sake of Sarah, so that makes sense. That's why we're waiting around. But Avram's got to give a eulogy, but now Sarah has to wait so that Avram can have a eulogy for himself. That's not fair. So the answer is Sarah Gufei Nicha ba Avraham. The answer is that was the nature of the relationship. Sarah would have wanted to wait for the eulogy for the sake of Avraham. Would have been an honor for her to be buried after the eulogy so that Avraham could be comforted. So that's why. Toshma, so that doesn't prove this. Again, we go back to the pasuk. V'safdu lo kol Yisrael, that the Avia again, they gave a eulogy, all the Jewish people gave him a eulogy, v'kavru also, and they buried him. Now, Yamar Bishum Yikar Dechaye, if it's because of the people who are all alive, who, so Hanach B'nei Yikar Ninhu, so then, are all of the rest, I guess this is the rest of the people who were not eulogized, why would they? The rest of the Yeravam's family were all evil people. So why would we care about giving them honor and eulogizing? So the answer is Nicha Luhu Litzadikaya de Miyakri Bahu Inshi. The answer is no, it's good for a righteous person that other people should receive a eulogy or a comfort through him. Right? So even he would have preferred that his relatives get comforted. Tashma, come and listen. Lo saftu v'lo yikavru. The rest of them, they didn't get a eulogy and they weren't buried. That it wouldn't be good for the tzaddikim, don't want to honor the wicked. So they didn't want to, if it was for the living, so that doesn't prove anything because the living wouldn't have wanted to hear the eulogy for the wicked people. And if it was for the wicked people, so the wicked people didn't deserve the eulogy either. So it doesn't prove either way. Tashma, come and listen. B'shalom tamus u'b'misrafos avosecha hamalachim harishonim asher yihayu lefanecha kain yisrafu lach. This is talking about This is talking about Tzidkiyahu, right? But Tzidkiyahu who's a righteous king, so he is told that you will die peacefully and with the bonfires where they burn the belongings of the kings out of respect. So those that happen to the older kings, well, they will do that for you as well. Vehavi adon yispedulach, and they're going to do eulogies for you. Now viamart mishum yakar dechaye, if it's for the sake of the people who lived, so then my nafgale mine. So then why does he care that they're going to eulogize him? It's not for him anyway. So the answer is hachi kamarli. This is what he's saying to him. Liyakru beich Yisrael ki hechi demis yakri b'havascha. So that says that people will be eulogized and will be honored by the fact that they loved you, so they will want to hear eulogies on your behalf. That shows how beloved you are. So even though it is a eulogy for them, it's a compliment to you that your family members will want to hear a eulogy about you. So it doesn't prove. Toshma, come listen. Nivze be'einav nim'as. The pasuk says in Tehillim that he is disgraced in his eyes and he becomes disgusting in his own eyes. So Zeh Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. This is talking about Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehuda. Shegirer Atzmos Aviv Almita Shachavolim. He was so upset and embarrassed about how wicked his father was, that he dug up his bones and he dragged them over coals in order to demonstrate how evil his father was. So now, if the rationale behind whatever kind of eulogies we perform are to comfort the living, my taima ki tikavile kapara lavua. So why would he do this? So the answer is because he's trying to give a kapara to his father.
Even though his father did all sin, isn't that still like some sort of chutzpah in respect for his father? Even though his father was a Russia?
Yes, it is. Not a bad thing, right? Nevertheless, right? He's got to make a demonstration that he is not respecting the ways of his father. So just because he's trying, so the answer is, so it was a chutzpah to do, so the answer is no, but he's trying to get a kapara for his father. So therefore, by giving a kapara to his father, it benefits him. So he says, but wait a second. So he gets a kapara for his father, but it's going to be painful for the Jewish people to watch because the eulogy, the positive treatment of a mace, is for the benefit of the people who are alive. What gives them the right to do that? So the answer is because Yisrael Gufayu Nichale de Michle Yikraihu Ligabe, that the Jewish people, knowing what an evil person he was, were happy with this situation as well. They wanted to see the kapara and they would have wanted to have the body treated like that as well. Toshma, come and listen. Amar lehen al tispeduni ba'ayaros. This is by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi when he passed away, said, I don't want to be eulogized in cities. This is what he told in the big, right? He says, don't eulogize me in the cities. V'iyamart yikara dechaye. So, if that, now, sorry, this is the Bayaros of the small cities, right? He says, only eulogize in the big cities. By doing it in the big cities, more people would gather together because they would leave the small cities in order to go to the big cities to hear the eulogy, and more people would gather together. So, if you're going to tell me that it's to honor the living, my nafgale mina, so then what does he care where they give the eulogies? Why listen to him? Kasavar lis yakru be Yisrael tfei. The answer is, he realized that by getting everybody together, that would cause everybody in the Jewish people to have a greater honor, and they would all be comforted more that way. Toshma, come listen. Halinu lichvodo. Right, if somebody is left overnight, but it's for his honor, for the sake of the burial itself. So lahavi lo aron v'tachrichin. Our Mishnah says, for example, to get a coffin or to get the garments, the things that there's a word for tachrichin. I can't remember what it is, but in any event, there's tachrichin.
In order to bring a casket or
shawls, right? Shrouds. That's the word, right? Yeah. Shrouds. So eno over olav. So you haven't violated the prohibition about leaving overnight. My lav lichvodo shalmes. So that proves that you're worried about the honor of the dead person. So all these questions we had, you're worrying about the honor of the live person, the dead person. This clearly seems to be the honor of the dead person. No, that is not it. Lichvodo shochai. It's because of the rest of the people want to see a respectful funeral. So therefore, that's why you're doing it. Mishum kvodo shochai. Mabit le lemes. So he says, I don't understand, because you're worried about the honor of a living person. So you're going to desecrate the body of this person, of the person who died. So the answer is you could stay overnight for that. Kiyamar Rachman, the pasuk says, Lo talid nevela so'al eitz. You shouldn't leave his corpse on the tree. Dumya de tolui. So therefore, this means just like something that's hanging. De'is be bizayon. If it's in a circumstance where leaving it overnight is going to be a disgrace. But here, Kevin delays baby Zion, since the body that's going to be staying overnight is not left in a state of disgrace. That's why it's not a bizayon to the mace. It's not desecration to the body. Therefore, for the respect of the living relatives, you can delay the funeral for the sake of the living relatives, as long as you don't disgrace the body.
Jerusalem doesn't really hold by that stuff.
Jerusalem, they bury immediately, right? They just
they go.
Yeah, they go right away.
Day or night.
Tashma, right? But that's the custom that developed there. It's a question.
Okay. So
that's their additional custom. Tashma, halinu lichvodo, right? Somebody who stays overnight for his honor. Lishama alav ayaros. So for example, to announce, I guess, in the cities, right, or to gather for him. Ayaros gather, I guess, the gathering together people in order to be able to give him a eulogy. Lahavi lo mikonanos. Lahavi lo aron v'tachrichin. Right, you're going to get people who are going to mikonanos are the people who do kinos, right? People who do the lamentations, right? Or in order to bring a coffin or the shrouds. Eino over a love. You have not violated the prohibition of leaving the body overnight. Anybody who does this is for the honor of the dead person. So doesn't prove anything. This again means whoever does these things for the sake of the living is not embarrassing the dead person, and that's why that's acceptable. Toshma, Rabbi Nosson says, Siman Yafa Lemes, it is a good sign to the body, Shenifron Mimenu La'achar Misa, that he is Shenifron Mimenu, that we're going to, I guess, Nifron, we're going to get repayment from him in this world, that he gets kapara from this. So how are you going to get this repayment? So, Mace Shalo Nispad, if you've got, for example, a dead body, a person who dies and doesn't get eulogized, Veloni Kaver, or one who is not buried, O Shechaya Goraraso, or if an animal attacks the corpse, O Shahayu Gishamim Mizalfin Al Mitaso, or if it rains on the coffin. So then, Zehu Siman Yafa Lemes, that's a good sign to the body. Any of those things that happen, that's a good sign that indicates that there's a kapara that's happening for the body. Shmamina, Yikar de Shechvi Hu Shmamina. So that proves that any of these things that happen is an honor to the body, right? Because we're going to say that these things that happen, obviously, they're not good for the living people, but it's good for the person who died, right? He gets a kapara because his body gets desecrated in some kind of a way. Shmami, no, that it's the mace that you're worrying about at the funeral, not the living people.
Don't they usually have like a shomer when someone is passed away in order for no one to give them a clap before they?
Yes, this is not what's normally supposed to happen. But what happens if somebody dies of unnatural causes? right? If somebody dies of a natural causes and the body is not together, there's a certain extra kapara that person gets. Right?
That's why some people are hard to go watch bodies.
That's right, correct. That's why we do it, in order to protect the body. But nevertheless, this is, if something happens, it is a good sign.
It's good on either side.
That's good on either side, correct. Lo hayu kovrin. So now, after the person was put to death, we wouldn't bury him in the grave site of his fathers. V'chol kach lama. Why is that the case? Why is this the case? So the answer is, Lefisha ein kovrin rasha itzel tzaddik. You're not allowed to bury a wicked person next to a righteous person. Dama Rabacha Baruch Hanina minayin she'ein kovrin rasha itzel tzaddik. How do I know that that's the case? Shneimar pasuk says, Vayhi heim kovrim ish v'hinei ra'u es hagedud vayashlichu es ha'ish bekever Elisha. So there was people were there. They were burying a person, and they saw the gedud. I'm not sure what the gedud is. As they
were burying a man, behold, they saw the enemy legion.
The enemy legion. Okay, good. And they threw the person into the grave of Elisha. Right? They were just trying to bury fast. The enemy legion was coming, so they tossed the fellow into the nearest grave, which happened to be Elisha's grave. Vayiga ha'ish ba'atzmos Elisha, the person's body touched Elisha's body, vayechi, and he came back to life. Right? Elisha had already died, right? Vayakam al raglav, and he got up.
Wouldn't that be considered like black magic or something?
No, that was the promise. Elisha was promised when Eliyahu Navi, he brought a person back to life, and so he asked, and he split water and these kinds of miracles that Eliyahu Navi did. His student Elisha said, I would like to get twice as much the miracles of Eliyahu. So Elisha was granted the ability to bring two people back to life. So he did bring one person back to life. He brought the child of that person that died who had done him the favor. So there was a story how he brought that child back to life, and then he never brought somebody else back to life, or so it seems. There's no other story about that. So what happened is after he dies, Hashem has to fulfill his promise. Here's this guy, just gets tossed in the grave, happens to touch Elisha's body, bam, he comes back to life. Okay, so that was the second time. Okay? So, so why would that miracle have to happen? The answer is, because this guy was a wicked person. He should be buried next to a righteous person. So therefore, that was worthy of the miracle of bringing the guy back to life, so he wouldn't get buried next to Elisha the tzaddik. Amalei Rav Papa, v'dilma le'ikiyuma. In order to, why do we know, why is that, why are you presuming that the reason why he was brought back to life is so that he wouldn't be buried next to a wicked person? Why not the fact that he has a promise that he has to keep? Vahina pishnayim beruchacha Eli, that maybe Hashem had to fulfill the promise that he had to resurrect two people. So Amar Le, he said, Ihachi hainu detanya al raglav amad uleveso lo halach. He says, I'll explain to you why. Because the guy never went home. The guy never got home. It just says he got up and he walked away. So he walked away and then fell down and died again, right? He just couldn't be buried there. So they made it, Hashem resurrected him enough that he would walk a little bit and then die again. Ella, vayhina pishnayim heichim mishkachas. Okay, but then that's a good point. So then where did Elisha ever bring a second person back to life? Right? Hashem promised and it never happened. So the answer is, the Achya. The answer is there's a story of Achya. So heichim mishkachas. So the answer is, well, sorry. Heichi mishkachas lo da'achya. So where do we see that he brought a second person back to life? So Amar Lei, Rabbi Yochanan sharipe tzaras Naaman. He saved the enemy general Naaman had tzaras. He had leprosy, and he was looking around for a cure, and Elisha healed him. And shehayim shkula kames, and somebody who has tzaras is considered to be like somebody who dies, who's dead. So therefore, he was healed from that. The pasuk says, "Al not tehi kames." Right, this is by Miriam. She gets tzaras that she says that she shouldn't be like a mace, so she shouldn't be like a mace. So we see that tzaras is like being a dead person, and so being healed from tzaras is like bringing somebody back to life. Okay, so now shem shein kovrin rasha etzel tzaddik, kachein kovrin rasha chomer etzel rasha kal. This was the issue. Why do we need the multiple graveyards? The answer is just like you can't bury a righteous person next to a wicked person, you can't bury a very wicked person next to a less wicked person. So v'liskun arba kvaros. So the question is, so why shouldn't there be 4 graveyards? Why are there only 2? Right? Because there's 4 different misos for different levels of crimes. So why should there be 4 graveyards? So the answer is Shnei Kvaros Gemara Gemirle. That we have a halachah Moshe Misinai. That's a tradition that we just only have 2 graveyards. Good point. It could be 4, but that we have a tradition. There's only needs to be 2. Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ula said Rabbi Yochanan Achal chaylev v'hifrish korban. Let's say somebody commits an avera. He eats forbidden fats. And he separates out a sacrifice. V'hemir daso. And then he decides, I'm not religious anymore. He says, that's it, I give up. He never brought the sacrifice. I give up. V'chazer bo. Now he goes back to shul and he gets a shmooze and he is chozer b'tshuva. So now he's back. So he wants to now bring his sacrifice that he had for the original avera. So can he bring that original one? The answer is, hol v'nidcha yidcha. Once a sacrifice is considered to be invalid, it can never be validated again. And when you haven't done tshuva, your korban is not valid. So this person did the avera, set aside a korban, but he didn't do tshuva, he's invalidated his sacrifice. Now he can't revalidate that sacrifice. You can't go back and revalidate something that you've invalidated. Itmar nami, this is the principle now, we're going to argue about this principle for a while, right? This principle is also seen. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Yavo, Rabbi Yirmiyah says in Ravo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Acho chaylev, somebody who eats the forbidden fats, and he separates out a sacrifice. Ve'nishtateh, and he loses his mind. He becomes unfit to bring a korban because he is not mentally stable. Now he goes back and he is mentally healthy again. Once this korban is not valid, it is continued not valid. I need both cases. If you told me about the first case, it's because he went off the derech. That's his own decision to do. That's why his sacrifice can never be. But the case where a person is going to become mentally insane, so then that happened against his will. So then, Ema Kayoshandami, it would be like somebody who's asleep, right? Somebody who's asleep, he falls asleep, his sacrifice is not invalidated, and then he wakes up, right? Mm-hmm. So therefore, that's not an invalidation, so maybe it would be the same case. If you told me about the case where he got mentally ill, so then that would be because Mishum de'em biyodo lachzor, that's because he has no control over coming back. So maybe that's worse. V'hasam debiyodo lachzor, since the person could change his mind and do bichozer b'tshuva at any time, maybe a sacrifice is not invalidated. Emalo, so tzrich, I need both cases to tell me that the sacrifice is invalidated in both circumstances. So Amar Rav Yosef, Af Ananami Tanina, we also learned this in the Mishnah. Hayuba Kodshim is Beach Yamusu. Let's say in this Ir HaNidachas, the city that's going to be destroyed because they worshipped idols, so they find sacrifices that are supposed to be brought as korbanos. So they have to die, right? Kodshe Bedek Habayis, if there was things that were sanctified to the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, yiftu, then you can simply pay the money for them and redeem them and give the money to the Beis HaMikdash. The question is, Amayamusu, why should those animals that were sacrifices die? Kevan de'iktol havilu kapara. So after all, once the people of the city have been killed because they've gotten their punishment for being in Ir Nidachas, so then haven't they been forgiven? And now that they're forgiven, they can now have their korban brought for them. So the answer is velisku ligavoa, and so therefore they should be able to bring this sacrifice for l'shem shemayim. So la mishum damrin and hoven yidchu yidchu, isn't it? Because once the sacrifice was pushed off, so it can't be back, right? Since they were doing the wrong avera, so they're doing the wrong thing, then avera, so the korban couldn't be brought. And then when they now get a kapara, the korban can't be brought now. So Amar Le'abai says, Misfar meis mitoch rish o havyolahu kapara. Says, wait a second. If somebody dies without doing tshuva, that doesn't give them a kapara. So these people, the reason why you can't bring their sacrifice is not because it was pushed off in the meantime and then they did tshuva. It's because they never did tshuva. So they never did tshuva, so their death isn't a kapara, therefore their korban is never valid. But meis mitoch risho lo havila kapara, right? Somebody who dies while they're still wicked doesn't get a forgiveness, right? It's only the people who get a forgiveness that therefore they. And that's not the case here. So that maybe doesn't prove that the animal that is invalid because once it was pushed off, it remains pushed off. It's invalid because the person died without a kapara. The Tani Rav Shmaya Yochol afilu pirshu avosav midarchei tzibur yitama tamalomar. So you might think that, let's say, a Kohen whose father goes off the derech, he's violating, he doesn't follow the Torah and things that I could still be matame, I could still become tame to that person as a Kohen. Tamalomar be'amav. The pasuk therefore says only in his nation. Meaning, ba'osim maseh amov. The father can only become tameh to his father if his father is a person who does mitzvos. So Amar le Rava. So what do you see? That the father died. Shouldn't matter. He should get a kapara. The answer is no. If he still does the averus and he dies, the father is still considered a rasha, and you can't be matame to him. You can't become tameh to him. So Amar le Rava. Rava says mikam adamis neharag mitoch risho lemes mitoch risho. You can't compare somebody who is put to death because of his avera to somebody who dies naturally while he's a rasha. Makes mitoch risho, somebody who dies because of his wickedness, meaning he gets put to death because he's a member of the Irni Dachas committee. Kevan dechi urche kamayis lo havile kapara. Nerag mitoch risho kevan delav ki urche mayis havile kapara. If you die of natural causes and you never do tshuva, so then there's no kapara, because you died naturally. But even if you don't do tshuva, if they kill you for your avera, you should get a kapara. So it's not a comparison. Teda, you should know that also, because the pasuk says, Mizmor la'asaf, Elokim ba'u goyim b'nachal asecha, right? The Hashem, the non-Jews have come into your inheritance. Timu es heichal kachecha, they have invalidated your holy temple area. Nasnu es nevelas avdecha machal la'of hashamayim. They placed the corpses of your servants to be the fodder for birds of the heaven. Basar chasidecha lechaysa aretz, and the meat of your righteous individuals to be the food for wild animals. So my avadecha, what does that mean for your servants? My chasidecha. What is avadecha and chasidecha? What is the difference between those two descriptions of Jewish people? Lav chasidecha mamish. Aren't the chasidecha really your chasidim, the good people? And avadecha haini demechayve dina demikara. So
chasidim, you mean like followers, right? That's what chasidim mean.
Chasidim mean people who are righteous, right? People who are righteous. Now, but avadecha are your servants, which means that before this death that they received, they were not so good, right? They weren't doing the right things. They were chayiv to get killed. Right? But Kavan de Iktol, but now that they got killed, Kari Luhu Avadecha, they return and get a kapara, and now they are your servants again. So Amrle Abaye, so Rabbi says, Mi Kamadamis Haruge, on to Mem Zayin Amid Beis, Haruge Malchus Laruge Beistin. How can you compare somebody who's being killed by a war, right? Or execution of the non-Jews to somebody who's killed in a Beistin? Haruge Malchus, when it comes to somebody who gets killed by a non-Jewish king, came to Shelo Bedin Miktali. Their death is unjust. There was no court case, there was no justification. So therefore, Havilu Kapara, since that judgment is illegal, you as we say, well, these are the Kedoshim, the people who are die al Kiddush Hashem. These are the people that get a kapara immediately because they die al Kiddush Hashem. But Haruge Beistin, somebody who's killed by Beistin, Kevad de Bedin Kamiktali, they're killed by right. That is the proper halachic course of action. Lo havi kapara. They don't get a kapara just by that. They have to do tshuva as well. And therefore, just by dying, that would not be sufficient. Teda, you should know that's the case, because B'tnan, the Mishnah says, Lo hayu kovernos bikvaros avosov, they wouldn't bury the person who got killed by Beistin in the cemetery of his ancestors. Now, Visaka Daitach, Kevin de Ikto Havile Kapara, that just by the fact that he died would immediately give him a kapara, Likvaru Misa, the Kovra, the Likavru, so then bury him in the regular cemetery. Misa, so therefore, because he got a kapara. So just if the death itself was a kapara, so then why do you have to bury him in a different cemetery? He should be fine. We just can't bury a Rasha with a tzaddik. But he's a tzaddik now that he was killed, right? So the answer is no, because the death itself isn't enough. Misa ukvura ba'inon. We need both the death and the burial in order for the kapara to be effective. So Mosif Rav Ada Barava. So Rav Ada Barava says, Lo hayu misavlin ella oninin. So we didn't do any avelis for the person. We only did aninus for the person. She'ein aninus ella belev, because aninus is an emotional thing, and avelis is a halachic thing. Now, visaka daitach kevan deikbor havila kapara. If you're going to tell me that once he was buried, so now the person gets a kapara, whether he did tshuva or not, right? So that means he's gotten killed, he's gotten buried, he didn't do tshuva. So now you're going to tell me that once he gets killed and he's buried, even without tshuva, he has now gotten his kapara, so then liyavlu ba'inon. So let him, So I'm sorry, liyavlu. So then let them do avelus. Because as soon as he's buried, the avelus starts, and at that point he's a tzaddik. So then let them do avelus. The answer is, no, there's another step. Because ba'inanami ikul basar, we need the flesh to decompose a little bit. So that's why we have to leave him in the ground a little bit. This is what you say, how long do you have to leave him in the ground for? Daikanami diktani, you can also see that from the Mishnah, nisa'akul basar, that once their body decomposes, malaktin asatzamos, at that point, then you're right, he does get a kapara. At that point, right, whether he's done his tshuva or he has not done his tshuva, we're going to have him killed, we put him in the ground, we allowed his bones to decompose a little bit, then we can gather his bones up, v'kover so bim koman, and you can bring him to the regular cemetery, shmami no. That's what we see. Rav Ashi Omar avelus me'emasai mitchilas. So he says, when does the avelus start? He says, mistayemes hagolel. He says from the mistimas hagolel, from the time that you seal the coffin. At that point, that's where the avelus starts. Kapara me'imas hakavya. He says he's disputing the fact that you need to have the decomposition. He says when you seal the coffin, that's when the avelus starts. At what point does the kapara happen? Miki chazu tzara dekavra purta. So he says once there's an affliction of the person being buried a little bit, right? That's where that happens. So therefore, there's a moment during which the avelus would start, and the person has not received his kapara yet. So therefore, now we get our proof. Ho v'idchu yidchu. So therefore, now that the avelus started and he hasn't gotten his kapara, so therefore we can't do the avelus because he's not a tzaddik yet, because he hasn't gotten his kapara. Therefore, the avelus gets pushed off. And now, once something gets pushed off, it remains pushed off, you cannot go back to it. So ihachi lama li equal basar. So if that's the case, that's a good point. So then what, if the atonement has nothing to do with the decomposition, so then why do we put him in the ground and let him decompose for a little bit? Why don't we just begin the burial and then pull him right back up and bury him in the right cemetery? The answer is mishum dilo efshar, because that's not possible. Apparently, you need to allow his bones to dry out a little bit before before the bones can be picked up again, gathered up, and then When
you mean loses all its blood and everything?
We're saying that I guess the body starts before the burial. He says when you're in that beginning phase, he says you can't take him off then. He says because I guess the stomach expands and it's not a good opportune time for the body to be relocated. So now how long does that? We were asking how long does that have to wait till the body decomposes a little bit? I don't know, but it has to have gone through some decomposition process so that the body it's not unpleasant for the body to be transferred. Okay, this is a good place for us to stop.